Welcome to Ask Rabbit Malicious Compliance, where a young private maliciously complies to orders and takes down a general. I have 4 great stories for you today, so let's jump into it. This first post is titled, "Don't explain to me that the time clock rounds clock in and clock out times until I'm short hours, and I will abuse the system." This is more of a petty compliance story, but I'm bored and thought I would share. I left a job I had been at for over 20 years to work for the town government where I lived. I had been salaried, but had burnt out and took a job with a lot less stress, but also an hourly position. I was about 6 months into the job when I was looking at my hours for the week. I was expecting to be into overtime if I stayed until 5. I was planning to ask if I could leave whenever I hit 40 hours since it would be before 5. I realized that my hours for the week were going to be short even if I worked until 5. After calculating the time I worked each day and comparing it to the payroll software, I talked to my boss and was told that the time clock rounded to the nearest 15 minutes. I was pissed. This was never explained to me when I started. Based on how things went when I started, it wasn't surprising. For those that don't know how this works, if you clock in between 7:53 and 8:07, the time clock records this as 8 o'clock. If you clock in between 8:08 and 8:22, the time clock records this as 8:15. When I did the calculations, there is a potential to abuse this to swing your hours worked by 2.5 hours every week, meaning I could work 37.5 hours and get paid for 40, or I could work 40 hours and get paid for 37.5. I looked up federal labor laws, and this was absolutely legal. Fine. From then on, I never clocked out in the 7 minutes past every 15-minute increment. I'd leave for lunch at about 11:53 every day and get back at 1:07. Time clock records an hour. Get back to work at 8:07, then leave at 4:52. If the time clock said 4:53, I'd go back and work until 5:08. I wouldn't have done this if I had been informed up front. Obviously, I couldn't completely adhere to this schedule, but I tried my hardest. So the best example of my abuse of the system was I lived about 5 minutes from work. Occasionally, my kids would lock themselves out of the house. They got home around 3 p.m. The first time, I asked my boss if I could go let them in, which seems stupid that I would even need to ask. She says to me as I'm walking away, "Make sure to clock out." I think it was meant as a joke, but obviously I was going to clock out. I'm hourly. It just rubbed me the wrong way. So I got to the time clock, clocked out at 3:08, drove home, let my kids in, drove back, and clocked back in at 3:20. The time clock sees a 3:15 clock out and a 3:15 clock in. If she hadn't said anything, I wouldn't have rushed home or back, and I would have had to make up that time. If how the time clock worked had been explained to me when I started, I wouldn't have abused it. Alright, this next post is titled, "He's on Vacation." My buddy from work got laid off for 3 weeks yesterday. He tried to tell HR and leadership it was a really bad idea because he is also in charge of a high-volume 3PL third-party logistics facility. Well, they did it anyway and gave him the choice of filing for unemployment or using vacation time. He decided to use vacation time. Fast forward to today. Customer service calls our offices saying that nothing is shipping from the aforementioned 3PL and is going to shut down at least 8 different customers. My boss informs them that the person handling the 3PL is laid off and sorry, we don't have access to that facility in our ERP to help them for checks and balances reasons. Vice Pres hears about it, then my boss's boss, then HR. My boss's boss comes into my office and asks me to take over the 3PL for a few weeks, and I lay out why I can't realistically do it on top of my normal job. I ask him why he can't just bring back the guy who did it in the first place because this sounded really important. His shoulders slump, and with a deadpan expression, he tells me he won't do it, he's on vacation. TLDR, don't lay off critical employees just to save labor. Alright, I hope you enjoyed those first 2 stories. Before we get into the next 2 stories, if you guys could please do me a huge favor and smash that like button down below. And make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss any future content. Alright, this next post is titled, "2-Star General Gets Taken Down by a Young Private." Obligatory, not my story. This is from a retired Ranger friend of mine. When my friend was a young Ranger, he was stationed at the Special Operations Command headquarters at Fort Bragg. One of his good Ranger friends was an early 20s private first class. Due to the specialized work that goes on at HQ, from time to time the building is locked down and only certain personnel are allowed inside the building at this time. When this happens, guard is posted outside to ensure that only those personnel are allowed in. On one particular day, the private first class was posted as security. Everything was going okay until a curious two-star general not affiliated with the command started walking towards him. The private first class asked him for his ID, but the two-star just told the young private to get out of his way. The private first class then did his job. He physically puts the two-star on the ground, weapon drawn, and ordered him not to move. The two-star continues yelling at the private first class, and eventually the private first class's commander comes out. The commander is a colonel. If you're not familiar with military rank, a colonel is a very high-ranking commissioned officer, but still 2 full grades below the two-star general, which is a very significant difference. The colonel is not having any of this and tells the two-star that he works directly for the 4-star and that he needs to get out of here immediately, an order which he follows. Eventually, the two-star gives a full apology to the command. Apparently, he was curious about the activity going on around there and he wanted to find out what was happening. My friend told me that his ranger buddy was really shook up by the experience. He felt much better after a lot of praise from his superiors and a big commendation for his actions. Alright, as prior service military myself, I can tell you that if I took down a 2-star general when I was a private first class, I would have been scared out of my mind. Alright, this next post is titled, "Almost 6 years later, my mom is tired of me obeying a command." Short and kinda silly, but I think it's funny. When I, a 20-year-old female, was about 14, my mom worked a ton and I was in charge of my younger brothers, 12 and 10 at the time, and the household. One of these jobs was getting the mail. Now you can probably guess that kids that age aren't the most responsible, so mail would just get left places sometimes. One day my mom got tired of trying to find the mail, rightfully so she told us to only get the mail if it was addressed to one of us. We complied, and 6 years later, I still only get the mail out of the mailbox if it's for me, even if she's home. It drives her nuts, but I just find it kind of funny, so I still only grab mine and my brothers do the same. Alright, that's going to wrap up today's malicious compliance video. I hope you enjoyed those 4 stories. Definitely drop a comment down below letting me know which of those 4 stories was your favorite. And if you guys could please do me a huge favor and smash that like button down below. And make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss out on any future content. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.